Karen, thanks so much for joining us today.
Sure.
How do you define a learning organization?
Well, it's a great question because just yesterday our CEO actually came out with an agenda topic that he wants to cover as part of his meeting coming up in a week or two, and it was all about continuous learning. So my personal definition is an organization where you can see people constantly encountering and embracing new and different ideas and opportunities.
How do you build a learning culture within your organization?
These days, that's a very different question, basically, than it would have been had you asked me that, 5 or 10 years ago. I think it's really quite challenging to try to build a learning culture, and the reason for that is because the way people learn outside of an organization, it seems to be dramatically different than the way people now learn inside an organization. So inside organizations, we still adopt and embrace a lot of traditional and formal learning approaches, although we're trying to get better at informal. But the way people learn outside of the organization is almost exclusively informal. It's through your peers, it's through your family members and your friends, it's via the internet. And so we're trying our best to, as quickly as we possibly can, move in more of the direction of that type of learning, because I do believe that's really the secret to continuous. Unfortunately, the paradigms that we've operated in, over the years have just not really facilitated that, but we're quickly trying to, embrace some new approaches.
Mm-hmm. And what would some of those new approaches look like?
Well, I think they look like, pretty much as I mentioned, the types of things that you see people doing outside of the workplace. And so, one of my favorite commercials recently is a commercial that came out from Samsung, which is all about their new Tab S. And basically the commercial is only 30 seconds long, and it shows people carrying around tablets and showing each other. It's like, hey, have you seen this? Have you seen this? Have you seen this? And it's all in the spirit of learning, basically. Showing somebody something and sharing and learning and building, some common ground and frameworks and knowledge. And so that's the way I think it should be. But doing that is, again, it's very challenging in an environment where those types of tools and resources don't necessarily exist, or people aren't used to leveraging them. They're used to something very formal, very different.
So right now, what percentage of your training is online versus classroom?
Well, we have a very significant amount of training online. Unfortunately, it's more formal online, right? And so, again, just to differentiate, we've probably got, I would say, 60% of all that we do is online in some way, shape, or form, with 40% of it being more of a face-to-face classroom type. But the things that are online are not online in a way that you can easily share, or you can easily collaborate, or you can easily be social, right, and form a community and these types of things. And we're trying to do better at that and more of that. But there's quite a bit of distance between where we are and where we need to go. But our vision is over the next several years, we will flip our current situation so that we'll be more, probably 80% collaborative, social, community, pervasive, and 20% of the more traditional online or offline forms.
Is there anything that you've done so far to push towards the more informal learning? And if so, what have the results been?
Good, yeah. We've actually done quite a few things. I mean, just recently we've done a little bit of work in the subject area of innovation. And so there's some innovation experiences, we call them, that we've worked with teams on. Some teams that are like intact teams, and then just some teams of people that kind of meet up. And we've had some really good experience. We've done some work with people getting together for short types of breakout sessions where they just kind of get together and do these breakout groups and learn from each other. And then we've done some things where we've put some various resources in social and collaborative spaces. And the feedback we've received has been, really very positive. It was all about trying to get people who have current innovation opportunities or challenges to be able to get together in the spirit of, solving and pursuing as part of the work, right, versus as a standalone learning activity.
How do you measure learning outcome? Is success tied to the bottom line, or are there other ways that you measure learning outcome?
Yeah, it's one of those situations that everybody's been challenged by for a long time. So the rule of thumb that we go by in the learning function at Cigna is we try to always have one business-aligned measure, or what we call a business-valued measure, and then one learning-related measure. And so as an example, we recently did some consultative sales work outside the United States. The business valued measure was all around generating additional revenue, and improving the persistency of our existing customers. So we had a couple business valued measures and metrics, and then we also had a couple that were related to learning effectiveness. Did indeed people gain additional knowledge and skill that can be sustained and leveraged? And so we insist on having at least one of both of those. And it's worked well. I mean, it helps us refine our learning, but it also helps the business appreciate whether or not they're getting value for the investment that they're making in the time and the money.
What types of behaviors do you promote in building a learning culture?
A lot of the behaviors, attributes that we promote are beneficial for a learning culture, but they're also just beneficial in general, right? So I'm sure, this is not a unique sentiment. So a behavior such as curiosity. Right? Curiosity is something that can serve somebody well in just about any facet of their life. It also happens to be really necessary if you want somebody to be a good learner. And then you also have things like optimism. I'm one of those firm believers that if somebody's really optimistic, it helps them to appreciate why other points of view may be important, which means that they've got more of an open mind and they're typically a really good learner, right? So a lot of them don't necessarily align strictly with learning or even necessarily mostly with learning, but they really are critical components of somebody having a learning mindset and therefore being a continuous learner.
Are there any specific behaviors that you look for when you're hiring leaders within the organization, aside from maybe some of these?
Yes. So I would say that the few that we've just talked about, absolutely. And then in addition to that, some of what we're seeing because of the way the future is unfolding, attributes such as agility and flexibility and humility. And one that, I was just having a conversation with somebody the other day, and I thought they brought up a really terrific point, which is, in the future, you've got to be able to be very change-oriented, as everybody knows, which typically means you have to be less certain and more open to the fact that approaches or ways of thinking or doing things that you may never have appreciated or valued before are at least worth consideration. And the leader's job is to be really open to any and all possibilities and not have an attitude of so much certainty, which I think is the way that leaders were defined in the past. Leader got up at the podium, and the more certain they sounded, the better everybody thought they were. And these days, I think we all have to get really good at accepting that certainty may actually be not quite so positive a characteristic.
What percentage of your revenue is dedicated to your learning and development function?
So that's something that, over the years we've debated quite a bit, not what the number is, but whether or not it was good. Because we currently invest in learning and development a much smaller percentage of our revenue than other companies. So, typically you look at like the ASTD best list and things like that, and everybody always says, oh, you should spend X amount of, your revenue on learning and development. And we spend appreciably less than that, which, X number of years ago, 3 or 5 years ago, we used to talk about the fact that that was a bad thing. Like we needed to invest more and spend more. And I definitely believe that over the years we've made more investment and that was appropriate. But at the same time, I really came to appreciate and believe that we just happen to be very efficient at what we do. The more focused we are in alignment with the few true business priorities, the more we were able to improve the business situation without having to invest so much in learning and development, which it doesn't necessarily correlate that just because you don't spend a lot means that there's something wrong.
So what is it that you're doing that makes it more efficient?
There's really two things. I think one is the ability to focus and align. And so, each year I work with a group of people in the organization, a group of executives that are part of an advisory board that we have. And we go through this process of deciding what are the characteristics and the capabilities that are most critical for the company to be successful with its business strategy. And we not only identify them, but then we prioritize them. And we never commit to more than what we can deal with given the budget situation that we have. And so, this year we're focused on 3: customer focus, change leadership, and influential leadership. And so those are the 3 big characteristics or capabilities that we're working on. So the alignment and the focus enables us to really just hone in on a few important things instead of trying to be everything to everybody. And then the other aspect of that I think is really important are the approaches themselves. So we've used a lot of experiential approaches, which tend to be, although they're a bigger time investment from people, they tend to be less costly, and they tend to have better sustainability. So it's just helped us be more cost efficient.
Tell us how you develop learning plans for the individual and for teams, and then for the organization at large.
So I'll start with the easier of the group, which is the organization at large, believe it or not, it's very difficult to do personal learning plans. But so for the broad organization, we go through the process that I was describing earlier, which is we work with an executive advisory team. We prioritize the few capabilities that we're going to work on. And then once they're identified, we have a group of people that are known as college directors. Their job is to determine what are the needs broadly in the organization, and then to come up with the solutions that would be used across the whole enterprise to develop those capabilities. Not that it's not a difficult job, but it's something that's repetitive, something we've done a lot, so we've got it down to, I guess, to a science. The teams, similar type of process. The difference being is that we have a different role in the organization that focuses on that. It's called a client business manager, and their job is to understand the more specific business strategy of that particular business group or team, and then to come up with a learning aligned set of priorities and solutions that will be used to deliver on it. And then for the individual, we really do believe, back to some earlier questions that we've talked about, that the individual needs to be a continuous learner. They need to have a mindset of continuous learning, and they need to embrace really putting in place their own plan with the assistance of their managers or their peers. So we don't create individual learning plans, but we do provide the tools and resources for individuals to work on those with the necessary other parties.
Mm-hmm. Tell us what your overall learning mission is.
Well, the overall learning mission that we have is to make sure that we have the right capabilities in the organization to deliver on the business strategy. And that in concert with that, or in parallel with that we also provide the necessary resources and support and tools for individuals to realize the career ambitions that they have. So we figure if we can be successful with those two prongs, then we will be very successful as an organization. And I think, for the most part, we're doing very well on the ability to align with the business strategies and to help the company be successful. And I think that we have more work that we need to do in order to help people really appreciate and deliver on those career ambitions. That's the place where we've had, I wouldn't say struggles necessarily, but we've got opportunities that we need to focus on for the next couple of years.
Any idea how you're going to be doing that?
Yeah, we've actually, so there's a set of activities that we've been focused on over the past year. So first of all, it was identified in an employee engagement result that we had in 2013, that the employees felt that we really did have an opportunity to spend more time and effort helping them realize their career ambitions. And so after that result that we received, we've spent now about a year putting in place a whole lot of different resources. One of them that's been really successful is a Career Talks video series. So it's funny that we're here videoing today. What we've done was we've worked with a variety of individuals throughout the organization that we believe have really insightful career stories. And we've had them video talking about what it is that they've done in their careers and how did they do it and what lessons do they have, for others that people can learn from. So that's been really popular, but it's just one example of some things that we've been doing to really focus on careers.
Tell us a little bit about your learning operation and managing content. Is content developed in-house or do you use outside vendors?
We, Cigna University, don't develop any content. So we outsource all of our content development to an outsourced company that we've been working with for quite a few years. So that's the formal learning content is developed in that way. As it relates to some of the informal content, like the Career Talks videos, we do those types of things in-house. And I think we're moving, as we move more towards the less formal, we are starting to get more involved in that type of content development as a company and as an organization. The other thing that we're very big believers in is curating content. And so we've actually spent about the past, I would say 18 months in a really focused effort to curate content from outside, to the point now that any off-the-shelf content that we had purchased over the years, we've discontinued using in favor of publicly available curated content.
So what are some of the sources that you use for that?
You name it and we use it. So basically what we do is we figure out what it is, what subject area is most important, and then based on the subject area we go in search of what are the best source of content. But it could range anything from a TED Talk to a very robust MOOC offering coming in from say like Columbia. It could be anything in that gamut, and we've tried to put a whole set of options available to people so that they can pick and choose based on their need and on the way that they prefer to learn.
And have you measured how that's been working? Have you been able to measure?
We have, yeah. The feedback in terms of like net promoter score of the offerings and the effectiveness of the offerings and those types of things, it's been very positive from the users. And from an affordability standpoint, you asked in an earlier question, how do we manage to do things very cost efficiently? Most of that content is now absolutely free. versus the portfolios that we used to buy from external companies that in some cases costed more than $1 million.
What kind of technology do you use to manage and deliver content?
We're still in progress, right, over probably the next 3 years, really trying to move from so much formal to much more informal. And I don't want to make it sound as if we don't utilize informal approaches. So as an example, we use a lot of experiential learning, which is terrific, but it's very difficult to scale experiential learning. There's a point at which you really do need individuals to be networking and sharing and working with each other on their own initiative versus as part of an experiential program that we design and promote. So that's where the technology comes in that we need to get better at and we need to implement more of. So we implemented early on some web environments, like even the corporate intranet has a whole collaborative aspect to it that people can utilize to share and develop knowledge. But we're still in the relative early days, and we're leveraging tablets and mobile, but we're still doing it more in the spirit of a learning program, leveraging that technology. We really have to get better at the technology being a source of people's ability to collaborate and share versus a way for us to push and promote programs.
Can you give us an example of some of your experiential learning programs?
We have an innovation experience that we offer around the world, and what we basically do is take a team of people who all have real world challenges or opportunities and work with them as part of this innovation experience so that they actually ideate and come up with ways they think they can solve the challenge or approach the opportunity. And then they also, once they've got those ideation elements, they turn around and do test and learn. And all of this is part of this experiential process using real live work challenges or opportunities versus in the old days would have been somebody flipping through course books or other things like that and just learning content for the sake of learning content. So it's really very different.
What would you say is your biggest challenge as Chief Learning Officer in an organization that employs 35,000 people globally?
Most days the biggest challenge is staying one step ahead of the business. And so what I mean by that is, I really do view that my responsibility is to stay one step ahead of other people because my job is to make sure that we have talent that's capable of doing all that we want and need it to do in advance of the business, in a lot of cases even realizing that it's necessary. Because at the point they realize it's necessary, it's likely because we're trying to do something that needs done and it needs done today. And if we don't have the skill and knowledge to do it, then we're going to be behind. And we can't afford to be behind. So I need to, from a business strategy standpoint, from a knowledge of the business standpoint, and from a capability development standpoint, try to be one step ahead with my team so that we can have the right talent out there and they can be leveraged at the point that the business realizes there's a need. Mm-hmm. It's very challenging.
And how do you do that?
Well, it's almost like we just came full circle in this conversation because I do it by being a continuous learner. I mean, really, I have to tell you that I read an incredible array of magazines and websites and white papers, and I talk to an inordinate number of people, and I really do view it as my job to absorb as much content, right, as that I possibly can, and then delineate within that content what's really important, and then act on what's really important and bring it to other people's attention. And so that's the way that I think I'm successful in this role.
How do you decide on what's the best, most effective learning approach for the organization?
Well, that's something that I have to say that I don't do personally. It is a very challenging piece of work these days because there are so many options. And I think that what makes it even more challenging is not only do you have a plethora of options to choose from, but certain options these days get a bad rap, right? It's as if all the focus is on some of the newer ways of doing things. And there's so much push to go towards those new directions that if you realize that actually one of the best ways to go about something is one of the older approaches, you have to influence almost more to get people to agree to one of those than you do to utilize one of what are viewed as kind of the glitzy approaches of the new age. So it's a very difficult job. We have people on our team whose full-time job is to figure out how to pull together the right option in order to make sure that the learning is effective and efficient. Very challenging.
Anything unique about Cigna's learning and development program that you feel has contributed to its success?
The most unique aspect of what we do at Cigna is the people in the learning and development function, because we have outsourced all of the more tactical work, they get to focus on strategy. And so, we talked in one of the questions about how do I maintain the ability to stay in front of the business and to be able to help lead the business to a place with talent that it needs to go. It's because we have the opportunity to focus our time and attention on that type of work versus running around, fighting fires with all the things that tend to absorb time in a traditional learning function. We don't have those types of activities absorbing a lot of our time because they're handled by a very reputable outsource provider. So my team and I are able to spend almost all of our time on strategic work that will be a differentiator for the company and for the function.
How has technology and the globalization of business changed the way things run in a learning organization?
I would say that what's made people in the function have to be more global, right? Which is not unlike any function that, of course, globalizes. But the learning function, typically people that focus more on their domain, and they weren't as customer-centered. And because they weren't as customer-centered, they didn't necessarily need to have as much global knowledge or savvy. And so one of the things we've really noticed is, as we've become more customer-centered as a company, there goes the learning function. Right now, we are also much more customer-centered. And the more that people in the learning function raise up and realize that they need to perform in a way that the customer values, it forces them to be a true global citizen, to be culturally aware and to be, an engaging, influential type of resource. And so definitely challenges people, but I think that people are really excited by the opportunity.
How much of training has to be adapted to the various workforce generations, Gen X, Gen Y, baby boomers? Do you have to be mindful of that when you're developing and administering training, or is it accounted for in the training?
It's just no different than any time you're trying to be very customer focused in what you're doing. You have to be prepared to take into consideration the personalized aspects of what people want and need. But I don't know that it's so much a generational thing. I think it's just really preferences. Some people that are older, people that are younger, they prefer to learn via mobile, or they have to learn via mobile because they're always running around the world, in a job that requires a lot of travel. Other people prefer to learn in different ways. And so I think of it more as just, the ability to deliver options based on preferences than I do as a generational situation.
How can chief learning officers stay relevant in the future?
I think it really all does come back to helping the business be in front. And in order to help the business be in front, it means you have to be in front. And it's really a paradigm that I think a lot of CLOs have now not only accepted, but they're able to perform to. But in the old days, and of course the old days being not even probably 10 years ago, the function was really more about waiting for someone to tell you they had a need. And I think that you even see it with the trends, like for example with the HR executives in a lot of companies are now not people with HR experience, they're people that have come out of the line. And you're seeing the same thing in CLOs, where a lot of the CLOs are people that have business backgrounds, they're not people that have learning backgrounds. And a lot of that is because it's really very difficult to stay in front if you don't have real understanding of the business now and the business for the future. And in my personal opinion, I think that's the way that it happens with most people. That's my background's the business as well, and so I think that has helped.
Do you feel like there's a skills gap of any sort when you're hiring in the industry?
I think there's a skills gap just in general, and my comments in that regard is outside the United States. So there's been, if you look at some of the work that's been done by like the World Economic Forum, they've identified that in most parts of the world you have one of two situations going on. You either have an extreme workforce shortage, a talent shortage, like in the United States where you just don't have enough people that have the skill, and then in places outside of the United States, in a lot of the developing countries, the problem is actually you have plenty of people, they just don't have the requisite skill, even base, like foundational skill. And so a job like mine, a lot of what we pay attention to is not only how to develop talent within our own employees because we can't hire certain types of skill, but then outside the United States, how do you give people that foundational knowledge and skill so they can enter the workforce and then build from there?
Can you talk about why you think the skills gaps exist?
Well, I think in some cases it's because, as with everything, it's the complexity in the world today is so significant and the speed of change is so significant that there's so many people that they almost barely get comfortable and skilled in one particular area, and then that area is now morphed or evolved to something different. So I think it's just hard to keep up. It's not to say it's impossible, it's just really very difficult. And then I think the other part of it is in the developing countries, I think there's just so many people and their education systems in a lot of cases just haven't evolved enough to give quality education to everybody, that you end up with a lot of younger people who are really interested in working, but they really just haven't had the opportunity to gain some of these, base skills.
What is your role as CLO to help address some of this?
Well, it's not only to try to foster more of a growth mindset within our company, and a growth mindset differentiated from fixed mindset. So a fixed mindset, you basically assume that somebody can develop, but their development is somewhat minimal, meaning you could not take somebody who is a customer service representative and skill them to be a data analyst. So you would believe that was not possible in a fixed mindset. But in a growth mindset organization, you would believe it is possible, that people can actually develop very significantly into other opportunities and skills and that type of thing. So my job is to help make my organization a more growth mindset oriented organization. Outside of the company, I think that my role is to try to work with community colleges and local businesses and associations to try to figure out how it is we can put in place some learning and development opportunities for people that may otherwise not have them.
Why did you decide to build a career in the learning and development industry?
Well, I didn't decide to build a career in this industry or in this function. I started out of school in healthcare. Matter of fact, my very first job out of college was as a medical cost containment specialist in healthcare. And I went from healthcare to IT to risk management to national accounts, which was more of like an account management position, to sales. And then one day, and I remember very distinctly, one day somebody called me. It was 9 years after I'd gone through this journey of building all this knowledge and skill in these various business and functional layers. The phone rang and somebody asked me if I wanted to take on a management job. So my very first management job ever was going to be to manage the IT education function at a company at the time was known as Aetna. And I said to the person who called me, I said, I don't know anything about learning and development. And they said, oh, it's okay. You know IT and you know this business, and I think you'd be a good manager, so why don't you give it a try? So I said, okay, I'll give it a try. And ever since then, I've been in roles that relate to learning and development in one way or another. Some of them were for-profit, so they were P&L type jobs. Others were involved in more of the R&D aspects of learning and development. And I've gone in all kinds of different directions. But ever since then, I've been in learning and development, and I've really enjoyed it because I like watching people accomplish things that they didn't appreciate they could. And a lot of what fosters that or fuels that is the ability to acquire and utilize new and different knowledge.
What would you say has made you successful?
Really two things, right? I have a lot of energy. I have a lot of optimism. I have a lot of passion. I'm not afraid to make mistakes. I have a lot of confidence, resilience. My father always told me that one of the biggest and best words that you could ever have, at your disposal or be known for in business is persistence. And so I think those types of things. The other thing is my real focus on networking. I have a firm belief that I will only be as successful as all of the people around me that I can rely on and touch on and count on. And so I've always, since I've been really just right out of school, I've always focused on fostering and maintaining and sustaining a really robust network. And it's really served me very well over the years.
What role did mentors have in shaping your life and your career decisions?
My father was probably my best work mentor of all. And he worked in insurance. He was a career, business professional his whole life, very successful. And I honestly cannot think of a single attribute that I would not want to emulate. He was just an extraordinary business person and also somebody that people just like to work with. But secondly, then my other work mentors were really very early in my career. There were two women. One was my very first boss, and another one was probably my third or fourth boss. And both of them, I just remember so many of the characteristics that they displayed that I was always committed to from those days on displaying as well. But I haven't had that many mentors recently, but I think you do get to a point that you become more of the mentor than you rely on mentors necessarily. But I had some really good ones early on that helped me tremendously.
Can you talk at all about some of the challenges that you might have faced in the workplace as a woman climbing up the ranks?
It's a great question, and it's something that a lot of people are focused on now because women in leadership is a focus of attention for a lot of people at Cigna and at other companies. And I cannot explain why, but I honestly can tell you that I don't believe that I've ever really felt any difference. And one exception may be that relatively early in my career, probably about, say, 8 years in, I was doing sales. And the sales job that I had was sales to independent insurance agents. And independent insurance agents, I'm sure even now, are proportionately, mostly men. But back then, I honestly can't tell you that I ever ran into a woman that was like an owner of an independent insurance agency. It was always the clerical staff that were the women. And that was probably the only time, but it wasn't as if they necessarily treated me any different or I felt bad. It was more that it always just really occurred to me that I was the rare woman in the room or in the situation. But I honestly, looking back on my career, I really can't recall a situation that I felt was particularly difficult because I was a female. It could be a state of mind, a lot of it as well, I don't know. But one of the articles that I read recently, which is pretty interesting, talks about really, they think, 3 things that are most critical for successful women leaders. One is grit, one is resilience, and one is confidence. And it could just be that, I was lucky enough to have a father that instilled those in me very early on. I entered the workplace, I think, with most of that, and it just could be that that's why I've never really noticed a significant difference.
What advice would you give to somebody who's just starting out in the industry, who's looking to become a learning leader?
My advice would be to get to know the business. And the hard part about most of this is that you have to pick a business. Like, you have to become known in an industry is my personal point of view, which does not mean you have to stay in that industry, but typically to become a leader and an executive, say, in a learning type function, you need to have the business savvy to sit at that table and have those conversations and influence people. Once you've been able to do that and you've earned a reputation for that, then I think it's like anything else. You can absolutely pick up those skills and transfer them to yet another industry, as long as you're willing to put in the time and effort to really learn that industry at its core. But I would say that focus more on learning the business than what you probably think is necessary. Then when you've got that, I would then worry about whether or not you know all that you need to know in order to run a learning function.
Can you give us some examples of some of your proudest moments on the job and for you personally?
Some of my proudest moments were the moments when, the people on my team were able to take on, new and different responsibilities. I get a particular delight when somebody accomplishes something that they didn't think they could do. And that's more common than I think most people think. And so, I spend a lot of my time talking to people in Cigna about opportunities that they can take on or projects and assignments that they can lead. And when you first approach somebody with something that's very different than what they've done in the past, and you can just note the hesitance in their voice, like, oh, geez, I'm not sure. And I have to convince them to take it on. And then 6 months or a year later, you can see the look on their face when they've delivered such a successful outcome. They are just so incredibly pleased with themselves. It makes everything worth it.
How do you manage differently in times of crisis?
I don't honestly think I do. So probably because, my style is I'm a very aggressive person. I tend to be, somebody who is calm even when, we're taking risks and pursuing new and different things. I tend to be a very hands-off type of leader. I'm not a micromanager by any stretch. I'm very much more the other end of the spectrum. And so probably in times of crisis, I tend to just touch base with people much more than I would otherwise, to make sure that they're feeling comfortable, that they, understand what we need to do, that they are getting it done without, a lot of barriers in their way. But that would probably be the one thing that I would think about that I've done differently over the years when faced with a crisis.